Welcome back, everyone. If I can get everyone to come into the room and quickly take their seats, we want to make sure that this next session happens on time so that we can get you out to lunch and leave you plenty of opportunity to catch up and network. I just did want to make one quick point. If you did miss scanning the QR code in the last session or you have any issues around that, all you need to do is go and see the ladies at the help desk and they'll be able to pull that up for you so that you can complete your that aspect if you miss the QR codes. So welcome back to this session. This is the Safety, Performance and Risk Management session, proudly sponsored by Idemitsu Australia. And of course, safety is the mining industry's #1 priority. And while many things are structured and regulated, others are down to a company approach and personal style. So it's always good to hear about different ideas that could be applied to your safety systems or culture. And we've got a really fantastic lineup aimed at challenging the way you think about this space. Our first presenter is Jodi Goodall, Head of Organisational Reliability at Brady Haywood, where she works with leaders to prevent fatalities and major accidents. And it's great to welcome Jodi back this year, focusing on safety performance metrics. Now, we all know senior leaders need clear visibility on safety performance to make better decisions, but today Jodi asks whether those safety performance metrics could be doing more harm than good, even leading us into a false sense of security. So please join me in welcoming to the stage now, Jodi Goodall.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks, everyone, and here I'm back again. It's lovely to see you all. Safety performance metrics. Businesses run on numbers, information, metrics, KPIs. They help us to make decisions. They help us anticipate failure. They help us see opportunities, and they inadvertently influence our culture. So you want to know that the metrics that you're relying on to give you that information is actually giving you what you think it is giving you, especially in safety. And our performance metrics, what would happen if they were actually doing us maybe more harm than good? We're going to explore that. We are going to look at some major accidents, research, and we're going to look at your own New South Wales data. So most likely when I ask you what your safety performance is like, if we got into a conversation over dinner or at the pub, you would start to tell me about the TRIF and LTIs. And I know I'm pretty spot on with that because I do have a lot of conversations with the industry about this kind of stuff. And it is the most common response I get. And certainly when I ask operations people, I can tell that it's the most embedded metric that we use, that we determine whether we're safe or not. It's part of our language. And just so we're all on the same page, we are just going to go through what it is. So I'm talking about jargon, I totally get that. If we think about the TRIF, if we think about LTIs first, if you took all of the work-related injuries, minus industrial deafness, minus lung issues, things like that, you take all of those and you divide them up, you end up with these buckets, and they're increasing in severity or harm. And then if you look at the top one, this is LTIs. So this is time away from work longer than a day, and that's what we call lost time injuries, LTIs. And the TRIF is lost time injuries, restricted work, and medical treatment. I know I'm preaching the converted, you all know this, but I'm just making sure. So these two metrics are the ones we talk about most. We love them because they're hard numbers, and we can standardise them. So we take the number of injuries, we times it by 1 million, we divide it by the hours worked, and we've got something where we can compare lots of different industries, sites, all of that kind of stuff. It's been around since the 1970s, and it is our primary measure of safety, no matter what industry you're in. It's in our legislation in some parts. And we use it in all sorts of comparisons. We compare contractor performance, we compare our sites. We pre-qualify and select our contractors, sometimes based on it. Man, it would want to be good, and it would want to be telling us the right things, hey. We link it to our performance, and we put bonuses around it, and we do all sorts of things like give barbecues. It really is embedded. Academics and people, when they're putting in a new safety initiative or a health initiative, will often quote whether their TRIF has gone down or up as a result, and that's a measure of success. It's in our company reports, it's used in indexes, it is infiltrated us intensely. So we do this because we believe it helps us manage risk. And it must, right? So if you have the number of injuries and those are going down, surely we're getting safer. Let's go deep into the Gulf of Mexico. It's April 2010. A helicopter with 4 senior executives is on board, heading out to one of their oil drilling rigs. The executives have got a lot of deep sea drilling experience between them, and this is a routine 24-hour management visibility visit, that's what they're called. According to their company, this rig that they're going to has an impeccable safety record. It's actually one of the best in the country. And they're expecting the next 24 hours to be really pleasant. Later tonight, they'll be handing out awards to leaders for their injury performance at a dinner on the rig. The drill rigs out here do such high-risk work. Deeper wells, more oil pressure, harder to manage. And this rig is 5 kilometres, the well floor is 5 kilometres below the rig. The chopper lands and the VIPs step out and start their tour. Today, the crew of the drill rig are at the point of sealing the well, which is known as capping it off. And before that means then they can take the drill rig and move it to a new location. And as part of this process, they're doing integrity tests, well integrity tests, checking to see that the well's not leaking and that it'll stay tight after they disconnect the rig. The tests are not looking good, like the well actually is leaking. If this is the case, hydrocarbons and methane gas will be coming back up the pipe. As the crew repeat the tests, they get more concerned. Then the VIPs come through as part of their tour. The execs can see that the well integrity tests seem to be troubling the team in the shack, but they leave the team to deal with it and head off to another area. They've got their own agenda. Today, they're discussing 3 things: hand injury awareness, dropped objects, and checking that the non-slip mats have been implemented, which was actually a big TRIF reduction at one of the other drill rigs. But this rig is in serious trouble. But let's just step back for a minute. I'm not trying to paint these executives as bad. These executives think they are leading safety. They think they're talking about the things that really matter. And like a lot of people, they have the belief that if they manage all of the small injuries, like the TRIF, that you see in the TRIF, they'll be preventing the big ones. To them, a lower TRIF actually does mean a safer rig. And that's reaffirmed to them because of the company effort that goes into it. Hell, their big bonus is attached to it. It must be important. Within hours, from all over the rig, there's an unbearable hissing sound that can be heard. Mud and seawater begins to blow out everywhere onto the deck. The air smells and tastes like hydrocarbons. They're losing control of the oil well below. Gas alarms are going off everywhere. The gases are coming from the well and they find an ignition source on the rig. Boom, an explosion. The pressure wave reaches all over. The PA system's bleeding fire, fire, fire. And the engineer deploys the main emergency switch to the well blowout preventer. This is a critical control that will physically cut the rig off from the well and seal it, but it doesn't operate. There's a backup, but it fails too. The controls that they should have been able to rely on to mitigate this don't work. 11 workers die and 7 are seriously injured in the explosion, and the rig sinks over the next couple of days. 5 million barrels of oil spill into the sea for 87 days, triggering the largest oil spill in history. It's the story of Deepwater Horizon, the Macondo oil field, BP and Transocean. But it is the story of so many major accidents and fatalities. Companies that have a heavy focus on performance injuries, on personal injury performance, often are driven by a belief that if they manage their minor injuries, that they'll be preventing the big stuff that doesn't happen very often. And this is a pretty long-held belief. Right back to 1931, when Herbert Heinrich, an insurance guy, completed an analysis of injuries. He found this breakdown of injuries was 1 major injury, 29 minors, to 300 no-injury accidents. And this is the basis for a long time around how we think about safety. And the overall proportion is correct, but it can also lead us into a false sense of security, that minor injuries are predictive of major injuries. And it leads us to think that if we're managing the smaller injuries that are happening all the time, that we are actually going to prevent those big ones. But is there even a relationship between minor injuries and the big stuff? Well, statistically, no. In 2020, a really important paper came out from the Construction Safety Research Alliance. And this alliance is the top construction companies in the US, teamed up with Boulder, Colorado University. And they asked this question: given the extent to which we use injury metrics, how statistically valid are they? And I really encourage you to go and have a look at this paper, because I'm only going to talk about one of the findings, but there are 4 really important findings in that paper. They found that when they did parametric and non-parametric statistical analysis, they found that there's no discernible association between the TRIF and fatalities. And that was 17 years worth of data, 3.2 trillion work hours. So it's a big, important data set. But that's construction. Does that actually relate to mining? Well, let's look at the newly released data of the TRIF from last year. This is all of the International Council of Mining and Mineral member companies. On the left-hand side, you can see the worst performers, people like Alcoa, South32, BHP. On the right-hand side, on the lower side of that graph, the best performers. You've got the Anglo-American, Anglo-Ashanti, Barracks, Vale. Let's overlay that. Those red dots are the fatality rates. And what you can see is they're all over the shop. They do not follow the same pattern. The 2 worst performers in terms of the TRIF were fatality-free. And some of the best performers are having the most amount of fatalities. There is no pattern. Company injury rates do not correlate to fatalities when you look at the data sets in this way. Let's go a level deeper. I want to talk to you about a study of 7 global companies that you'll recognise: Exxon, BHP, Shell, Maersk. These companies pooled all of their incident data and their fatality data over a long period. And they came up with 2 main findings. There's 3, but we're going to talk about the 3rd one in the workshop on Wednesday. The first one is that the causes of serious injuries and fatalities are different to the causes of less serious injuries. The second finding is that of all the minor injuries that are reported, 80% of those have low potential to ever be any worse. So let's double check that with the stats from New South Wales. Thanks to Coal Mines Insurance, these are hot off the press. This is the last 5 years LTIs for the industry, for the coal mining industry. And if you look at the top 3 there, you've got body stressing, which is musculoskeletal type injuries, slips, trips and falls, and hit by moving objects. So that's tooling issues, hand injuries, stuff like that. That's 3/4 of all of your, 74% of all of your LTIs that happen. Now let's look at how people die. This is the fatalities from the ICMM member companies. And it's a very different list, a different set of mechanisms. Mobile plant is in there, but you start to get into structural failure, energy isolation, irrespirable atmospheres, fall of ground, fire, pressurised systems. And what we start to realise is the causes are really different of the stuff that's in the LTIs to how people die. You can fix everything in your LTIs and it's not going to give you a very good understanding of your fatality risk. Different mechanisms, different causes. The other thing that's really important out of this is 38% of all of the fatalities are process safety failures. So with LTIs, the proximity of the person to the hazard is super close. And the interaction is usually, person-based, worker-based. But when you look at how people die in mining, a lot of that is big systemic failures, stuff that is not related to the worker as much. And if I just take you back and think about a different industry and we think about commercial airlines, imagine if they tried to convince us that they were safe to fly by telling us their TRIF and LTIs were going down. Like, would you still get in a plane? You would know that it was not true. It would seem like madness. But in mining, we think about these big process safety risks we've got and our fatality risks, and still, when our leaders talk about safety, they're talking about the TRIF, they're talking about LTIs. It just doesn't compute. So the takeaway here is that there's no discernible association between the TRIF and fatalities. And so we must begin to think about these separately. Managing fatality and accident risk independently of our TRIF and LTIs. I'm not saying don't manage it. I'm saying don't think when you're managing one, you're managing another. And this is going to be a massive mindset shift for the industry. They don't add up. And on top of that, if you're thinking about your fatality risks, your fatal risks, you absolutely need to consider that even rarer events, the process safety events, need to be managed and talked about separately again. So I hear a lot of people say, but yes, the LTIs and TRIF, it's especially safety professionals, because we have been indoctrinated with this way of thinking that if we are managing the TRIF, we're actually doing our job. So it's a really big mind shift for us as professionals as well. And I hear a lot of people saying it drives our culture, it helps our leaders focus. And that's true, I do not deny that. But in what direction, and is it for the better? I've been in safety a super long time, in defence, in explosives, chemicals, mining, and the TRIF was linked to my bonus really early on in my career. And I got really good at managing it. Actually, one leadership team called me the queen of the TRIF because, I was very good at helping them get their bonuses. And I did it in a lot of ways that I'm probably not proud of now. I know every trick in the book of how to reduce the TRIF and LTIs. I know how to game the classifications. I know how to put aggressive injury management strategies in place and that get workers back the next day. I run the best improvement strategies, focusing on the really high frequency events, even though they're low, they're minor injuries. But I did it all under the banner of, I thought, being safer. But you have one fatality and pretty quickly you realise that you are not preventing those things. And when you've got really good strategies and your leadership are focused on the TRIF and they're focused on LTIs, most likely they're distracted from preventing the things that really matter. And so I'm just going to give you an idea of what that might look like. These are the top 3 LTIs by mechanism in your stats. If you were focusing on these things, you would be doing things like hand injury programs, behaviour-based safety programs, housekeeping inspections, slips and trips programs, telling people to be safer, PPE compliance. These are the types of things you're spending all your time on. And before you know it, it infiltrates your conversations as leaders. It infiltrates your budget. You start to spend money on this stuff. And it infiltrates your focus. And it also takes up time of your safety team. Your safety team are your independent, fresh eyes to challenge you as leaders and to really help you focus on the things that matter. Especially if you put it in their KPIs too, they'll definitely focus on it. And it can be really easy to be distracted by these things that are happening right in front of you. Major accidents and fatalities are rare, and it's even more reason to have metrics about those that really tell you about the health of your fatalities and your process safety events. Process safety events, structural failures, I'm talking about dam failures, I'm talking about fall of ground, those kind of things. It also drives us to do a lot of stuff that we probably know doesn't help inherently, but do things like put signs on our front gate. It seems harmless, but these are all reward strategies, and they're all non-financial ways of talking to people about what really matters. The other thing we do is we include LTIs and TRIF in our bonuses. And we do this with really good intentions. We're doing it because we want to give the impression that we care about safety. But it's got unintended consequences. And I think we all inherently really do know this. It's driving people to not tell us about the things that we really need to know about to improve our business and prevent the big things going wrong. And that's because it creates this internal tension, this thing called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is a brain process that occurs when a person holds two contradictory beliefs at the same time. I have an injury and I know I should report it, but I don't want to be the person that breaks our 275 days. So I might just nurse it a little bit longer and see if it gets better. I have a near miss, and I have one of those oh shit moments, and I know that we probably should talk about this. But is that one of those events that might risk my bonus? Might it risk my team's bonus? I'll just keep it to myself if I can. And this is the process that our people are thinking through all of the time. And what this does is it doesn't give you visibility of the events that you really need to learn from, and it loses the opportunity for workers to get early treatment. So in the end, you end up with more LTIs. Learnt the hard way. And this is confirmed over and over again through lots of research and well-accepted reports. The Digging Deeper report, one of your own New South Wales reports, talks about contractors and workers that are penalised, financially or otherwise, don't report injuries and illnesses. The Queensland Coal Mining Board of Inquiry researched referenced NIOSH, which was a coal mine worker study back in 2014, that talks about the reasons commonly given for reporting incidents, for not reporting incidents, were jeopardising rewards based on low injury rates and fears that co-workers would lose their bonus. So does this still happen in Australian mining? Do you guys have targets in your performance bonuses for your workers? Maybe not if they're under EBA. Do you think your contractors do? Do you as leaders put these targets on yourselves? Are you financially rewarded for the TRIF and LTIs? My experience tells me yes. Here's a recent example from the Bowen Basin. Everybody knows that I love to talk about the Anglo-Grosvenor mine. It was the site of a major methane explosion in May 2020. And more recently, another methane ignition that ended up in an uncontrolled fire and sealing of the mine. And at that time of the first incident, workers publicly talked about how the reporting culture was really, really poor there. Let me give you an example of what their performance bonus was like. It was based on production and development meters, and it was up to $4,000 a month, but it had a safety modifier on it. If you, as a worker, had an injury on the shift that was medically treated or above, the entire 400 workers on that shift lost their bonus. You tell me whether that would kill your reporting culture or not. And this is happening now in our industry. And yes, that's Queensland, but I'm sure we could find examples where that still happens now. And it takes me to my favourite saying by Edgar Schein, who's a famous sociologist, and he says, leaders create cultures by what they measure, focus on, and reward. Choose wisely your metrics, because they will influence your culture. And it starts at the top. If your board thinks safety is its injury rates, if they think if they can get the injury rates down that they're being safer, then process risks and fatalities will be in their blind spot too. They're not asking the right questions. Let's talk about the Pike River board. I'm going to give you 3 pieces of information out of the commission that I think are really, really important. And for those who don't know, Pike River was a methane explosion in New Zealand in November 2010, where 29 workers lost their lives. And it's got so many similarities to Grosvenor, it's not funny. The first one is the statistical information provided to the board on health and safety comprised mainly personal injury rates and time lost through accidents. The information gave the board some insight, but it's not much help to assessing the risks of catastrophic events from high hazard industries. And the board appears to have received no information proving the effectiveness of their critical systems for gas monitoring and ventilation. But that was over 20 years ago, hey? We wouldn't be doing that now. Our boards wouldn't be talking like that now, would they? New South Wales mining has had a fairly good run over the past decade. Coal mining particularly. I want to acknowledge the fatality of the tyre fitter at Benguela in 2018, but besides that, you guys have had a fairly good run. And you might be thinking that what you're doing is working as well as it can. But I want to ask you to consider, do you think you're good or do you think you're lucky? I see news articles all the time where big New South Wales coal miners, CEOs are talking about their TRIF rate and not even mentioning all of the fatality potential events that they've nearly had. I see it as the sole metric in a lot of annual reports still. What fatalities might be in your blind spots? The safety bulletins would say lucky, methane gas incidents, bulldozer incidents increasing, rock falls in underground mines where workers have been involved, dangerous lifting equipment incidents increasing. You won't find these in your TRIF or your LTIs. More events, roof falls, workers in unventilated areas, dozers, uncontrolled travelling down ramps, outbursts. Again, these aren't injuries. You won't find them in your TRIF or LTIs. You can fix everything in there and you still won't be fixing these things. And the reason is, you know, these types of things, they're so important because they tell you where your controls are ineffective or absent. They're super important to have programs around this and to start talking about these things more. Put these things in the minds of your CEOs. Let's go back to our executives on Deepwater Horizon. They were 7 years LTI free when they had that major accident, and it didn't help them in the slightest. Their focus on injuries took their eye off their major hazards, and it resulted in one of the worst environmental disasters in history. It was reputationally crippling. Think about the metrics you're using in your business, at your site, with your teams. Are they helping you prevent the big stuff? Business is based on numbers, and I, for one, do not think we should remove metrics. I think they help us, as I said before, drive a culture. But I think we should be really clear on what they're telling us and what they're not telling us. If you look at your financial health, we have lots of metrics that come together to tell us a story, a narrative, about how well we did this year, how well we're doing right now, what our how we can sustain that in the future, and the capacity of our ability to continue to do those things. Imagine if I took away all of these important metrics and said you could have only one. It's important, but it's certainly only part of the picture. It tells you an outcome, and you'd be partially blind running your business without it. And in company law, you'd probably be seen as negligent. And it's the same with the TRIF and LTIs. They're only part of the puzzle. So what should you measure? You guessed it. Like financial metrics, there is no silver bullet. In terms of a lagging indicator for benchmarking as an industry, I would actually go one level up if you're talking about lagging indicators. Move to the serious injuries and illnesses. And the regulator's actually already keeping this data at a site level for you. It's actually how they're measured by Treasury. You can set a goal for serious injuries, 0 serious injuries and fatalities. And it cuts out all the smaller injuries and will help you and your leaders focus on at least the things that are super important. But the problem's not solved here. We have to turn our numbers and the way we think about safety into a narrative. They have to help us anticipate the warning signs of failure, check whether our systems and our controls are effective, help us see whether we've got the capacity for safety in the future and whether things are going right, and understand whether we're having serious harm. So in summary, the TRIF and LTIs tell you little about your fatality risk and process risk. You can't use the TRIF as a proxy to understand those things. Rewarding the TRIF and LTIs drives under-reporting, things you need to know about your fatalities. And get information about your fatal risk and your process safety controls. Are they in place and effective? And put that conversation in front of your leaders. It'll help you to be better, good, not just lucky. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jodi. I've got a question for you if you've got time. And keep the questions coming through the app, because there will be a couple of minutes at the end of all of our speakers to be able to put them to them. So I've got here, how can board members be convinced that TRIF is a terrible metric and it should not be used as an indicator of safety performance?
I think use your data, and I'm happy to share any of the information that I've, it's all publicly available. But I think you've got to put data in front of boards for them to really start to make this sink in. Yep.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Jodi Goodall for being with us. Before we get to our next speaker,